quality data and statistics for reliable AI, meeting the moment for sustainable development. And here today we have Shaida Badiee, who is the Managing Director of Open Data Watch. She is joined by Yusuf Murangwa, who is the Director General of the National Institute of Statistics of Rwanda. We have Oliver Wise, who is Chief Data Officer and Acting Undersecretary for Economic Affairs in the U.S. Department of Commerce. François Fonteneau, who is Deputy Head of Paris 21, and Gevorkian, Director of Public Policy in the Office of Responsible AI at Microsoft.
Thank you. Thanks, Audrey. And what a great day it is, except for the weather. Sorry, we did not do that well, those of us that live in Washington, to make this a beautiful, sunny spring day for you to all come here. But it's really a great topic for the panel one, quality data. We've heard amazing comments and perspectives this morning from various speakers. And one thing I walk away with it is that we all have mixed feelings about, of course, the power of AI. There was a lot of excitement, as we saw from the pool, but there were also some risk and cautionary hints there that we should be careful about applications of AI. But one thing I think we all heard, and I hope you all agree, is that without quality data, we're all going to be in trouble with applications of AI. So it's really important to pay attention to the quality of data. And this is the subject of this session, and we're going to be probing with this amazing panel into that. I just wanted to say that when we talk about data in this context, we mean really data from official statistics, but also data from private sector, from big data, from citizen-generated data. So it's really a broader definition of data and the expertise of the panel that we bring. And also when we talk about quality, we're talking about quality in the broad sense. We've heard from Haishan, who actually brought down, disaggregated the quality into really this dimension, important dimensions, the dimensions of for data to be accessible, to be foundable, to be interoperable, and to be reused, but also dimensions of data to be inclusive and to improve agency of people in data, and data that's trusted and is traceable. In other words, the data that's really governed well, and I hope we hear some of that from our panel today. So without further ado, let me turn to the panel. This is called a fast-paced panel. I heard the name by our colleagues from Paris 21. That means I have questions for our four panelists, and with quick responses. Then very quickly we come to you. So get ready to get engaged. There's a lot of time allocated for that, and for you to ask the questions from the panel, also maybe some brief comments that you would like to make. So Audrey introduced our distinguished panel, but I will quickly go to the questions now. And if I could start first with Yusuf. Yusuf, we heard about the countries in the global south leapfrogging and really sort of trying to get to a point of building an infrastructure faster, at least in the developing countries, to be able to use the power of AI. In your view, what is the role that national statistical offices play in this context in the next AI revolution? And how are you addressing it in Rwanda?
Yeah, thank you very much, Shaida. This is a very interesting topic. We had very good discussions this morning. They set the bar so high. I think what statistics offices should do in the next AI revolution depends mostly on what is happening or what will be happening in the future. What we see happening is we see around 5 things. The first is demand for data is increasing, and it will continue to increase very strongly. And policymakers, the public, are not patient to wait for statistics that take so long to be available. The second issue is we now have a lot of data. There's a lot of data being generated. Most of this data is not in national statistics offices. It's in the private sector. There's citizen-generated data and so on and so forth. And this data has to be available. It has to be structured. It has to be complete. There are so many things that need to be done with data. The third issue is the data space is very attractive. So many stakeholders are coming into the data space with a lot of interest. The private sector, civil society, researchers, and so on and so forth. The fourth issue is there's a lot of innovation. There's a lot of technological innovation. And again, this technological innovation is not in the statistics organization mostly. It's mainly in the private sector, it's in academia. And this innovation, especially AI solutions that facilitate managing data, making statistics available, processing data, creating efficiencies in the systems that produce statistics. And finally, there is governance issues around ethics, around transparency, around ethics, transparency, about confidentiality, alternative facts, and so on and so forth. So statistics offices going forward, they need to be proactive to catch up with what is happening in the private sector and what is happening in academia and other researchers, but also deliberate to determine what scope do they want to take in this space, because this is a very big space. So statistics offices and for that matter, even international institutions that deal with statistics. Statistics offices, first of all, have to be proactive in leading, coordinating, and facilitating the development of solutions, AI solutions that are useful, especially for official business. And of course, collaborate with the private sector and other researchers to make sure that those solutions are appropriate and they serve the purpose that we need to achieve. Two, we need to build a lot of awareness. With a lot of data, a lot of processing and statistics, we need to build awareness. Traditionally, we've been focusing on official statistics, where methods are tested, they are validated, we are sure about the numbers, but we are increasingly seeing experimental statistics. And also, for example, in Rwanda now, we are discussing about operational data and operational statistics. And we see this mainly being useful in areas, for example, like when there is a disaster, you have statistics, you have data that is not complete, but can be worked with. And this data changes with time. So building awareness that this data is useful, but it's not complete. And it changes with time and it gets complete with time. So building awareness to know when do we use official statistics, when and how can we use experimental statistics, and also operational data and statistics is extremely important. And creating the space so that this innovation can happen and the experimentation. And finally, partner with other stakeholders. The data space, the AI space is very big, and we don't think national statistics offices want to take it all. So we need to partner with other institutions, especially regulators. For example, in Rwanda, we are partnering with regulators like the central bank, working with telecom regulators, working with transport regulators, service regulators, partnering with the National Cybersecurity Agency, the National Data Protection Agency, to make sure that we put in place governance arrangements that can work for us, but can also facilitate to mitigate the negative sides of big data and artificial intelligence. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Yusuf. That's really great. I would just a very quick response, if you could give to a follow-up question I have, is a lot of what you mentioned is, of course, very optimistic, very hopeful. Do you think we need to revise some of our planning, the way we plan statistical strategies, like the National Strategy for Statistical Development, to be able to bring AI strategies closer to it?
Yes. In the past, we've been working on national statistics strategies, development strategies in most of our countries for the last, I think, 15 years. We are going to the 4th generation. Normally, it's 5 years. We are going to those that started early. We are going to the 4th generation of national strategies for developing statistics. And 2 things were missing. One, we were missing the big data agenda in the national strategies for development of statistics. And now recently we are realizing that we also need an AI strategy to be part of the big statistics development strategy. And there is a lot of debate whether it's the right time, especially for low resource, low capacity countries, to include that into the business of national statistics officers. I don't think it's early. I think it's timely. And what we can do has a big spectrum. There are basic things that even low-resource countries can take up to improve efficiencies for what we do in terms of processes, to make statistics available, for example. These are not very high-skilled, high-capacity issues that can be done. Of course, there are medium-level initiatives that we can still do in developing countries. For example, AI solutions, big data solutions, for example, to analyze geospatial images and so on and so forth. These are things that we can do, although they are middle-level capacity issues. And of course, the high-level issues, this can come later. And we can always learn from those that have done. So I think it's timely that we include AI strategies in national strategies for the development of statistics.
Thanks, Yusuf. Really appreciate that. And if you've noticed, Johannes, I'm collecting some action items for you. So let me turn to you, Oliver. You have an amazing job. I've been reading about your position and your job as the Chief Data Officer and acting Under Secretary for Economic Affairs. You're responsible for leading the Commerce Department's data strategy and providing policy direction and overseeing the Bureau of Economic Analysis and also the Census Bureau. Wow, do you get to sleep at night? You're heavily involved now, I see, in modernizing open data, well-done practices to meet the expectations of users. The question is, can you tell us more about the Department of Commerce? What are you doing in making the data fit for this AI age?
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the organizers of this very important, very timely, very relevant summit. So just a second on what the Department of Commerce, which is not a particularly well-named agency, but the Department of Commerce is not in the international development arena, but we do have equities in many of the other topics being discussed today. Department of Commerce is the lead agency in the United States that's leading work on U.S. competitive advantage in emerging technologies, especially semiconductors. We're the lead implementer of the CHIPS and Science Act. We're also the home of the new AI Safety Institute. So the NIST is part of the Department of Commerce and is the developer of the AI risk management framework, which is the back body of a lot of international law now and regulations on AI governance and safety. And that work continues at the Department of Commerce. And we're also a massive data publisher. So in addition to being home to 2 of the crown jewels of the U.S. statistical system, the census and the BEA, we also host NOAA, which is one of the leading collectors and publishers of climate data. So we have a lot of data. We got into this topic, we at the Department of Commerce, like everyone, started playing with ChatGPT ChatGTP when it came out. And we asked it a simple prompt, which was, tell me about Suitland, Maryland. That's where the BEA offices and census offices are located, right? And you said, tell me about that. And you get answers from both with some demographics, some economic statistics about Suitland. At least 50% of those statistics were wrong. Right?
Oh my goodness.
And they were wrong because the AI was retrieving the data from its training set, which did not contain any of our data, but instead that data, as far as we can ascertain, came from a landscaping company in Suitland, which just happened to have on their website an About Suitland thing that was SEO'd, so that's what the bot got, and it spat out all this incorrect information to users. And we thought, wow, if with hundreds of millions of users, if that's how the new marginal user is going to interact with our data, well, there's a lot of things industry has to do in order to improve the performance and the reliability of their AI applications. But it's on us as data stewards to ensure that we are publishing data in ways that enable a user experience where a lay user of these technologies can reliably interact with them to understand and analyze our data. Indeed, that is our responsibility as data stewards. So we created a working group out of our data governance board, chaired by Census's chief scientist, Sally Ann Keller, and they will be issuing an RFI, a request for information, to industry, to government partners, to academia, to understand how we as data publishers, and with the Census Bureau is like the denominator for a lot of what users are analyzing when it comes to economic data or social demographic data. How do we publish our data in ways that can enable a satisfying, reliable user experience? And we have some hypotheses that are in that RFI. One is that right now in the United States, machine readability is the standard, right? That was the principle that came out of the open data era that I think really kicked off in earnest in the late aughts. And the important piece in machine readability, with the important backbone of machine readability, is we as data stewards ought to publish ways so that machines can ingest and parse our data so that humans on the other end can use BI applications or use statistical software packages to analyze their data, where they use their expertise and their contextual understanding of the world and the fields in which they work to analyze that data, right? But we think now that with many more users using AI as an intermediary to analyze that data, the machine readability standard just isn't sufficient. And instead, we need to make that data machine understandable as well. So the metadata, which has always been important, the stakes are much higher now with the ubiquitous adoption of Gen AI, and that we really got to hammer home in our data publishing standards how important metadata is, and adopting standard ontologies, that there are knowledge graphs that can link those ontologies, and that the AI is exposed to those knowledge graphs so that when a user uses those applications to analyze data, they can get a reliable response.
Thanks, Oliver. I really liked how you framed this in the context of the good data stewardship and the responsibilities, while you really make sure that data gets to be valuable. And I like the way you're moving along the open data waves. Now you're moving to wave 4. Can you imagine? We started in wave 1 in the World Bank in 2010, and here we are on wave 4, where we're talking about the understandability of the data and use of metadata. Thank you so much. I'd love to hear more about you, and when we come back, and hopefully there will be questions from the audience for you on how you manage and govern this transition. Let me now come to Ani. Ani, really glad to have you here. I understand that at Microsoft you're working to accelerate the adoption and positive impact of AI by bringing together innovation in research, product, and policy. So, it's a tough question. We know data fuels AI, and one way that the private companies can contribute to public goods is through openness and data sharing. So how does Microsoft actually reconcile this data sovereignty and its willingness to share and open some of its data belongings?
Thanks, Shaida. And thanks also to Paris 21 and the World Bank Group for hosting us today. I agree, Shaida, it's a tough question, but it's a fair question. So I will start by saying, fundamentally at Microsoft, our approach is to make data as open as possible. We completely agree with this idea we'll be hearing over and over again today, that the value of data increases the more that it can be shared among people and organizations, and the more that it can be combined in new ways. So we totally take that as a starting point. And in fact, in recognition of that reality in 2020, Microsoft launched an office called the Office of Open Data. And the objective of that office is to help bridge the data divide. To that end, we've taken a number of measures. We've done things like co-found an industry group that advances a set of commitments to make private sector data available as much as possible, especially for purposes that advance, broadly societal end goals. We've opened some of our own data sets, and we've invested in developing new tools and techniques for data sharing. So, this is something that we certainly recognize. We have a commitment to open data, and we've acted in accordance with that commitment. At the same time, what we think is that when you're analyzing the value of data, what you really need to be focusing on is the outputs, the outcomes that can be achieved through the use of the data, and not simply access to the data itself. And so when you think about data in the context of AI, what that leads you to sort of realize is that there are instances where recognizing the rights of data holders actually yields better outcomes. So when we're, thinking about data in the context of AI, the reality is that we have at Microsoft firm obligations arising from privacy, legal, and commercial considerations that require us to sort of constrain or not make freely available all the data that we're using. But what this means is that we're able to access more rich, broad, diverse data sets, and in turn, that helps us create better tools and to build trust in those tools and thereby facilitate broader uptake of those tools. So if I have the time, I'll just unpack that a little bit. First, it helps us build better tools because, again, as we've been saying, the more data that you can feed into underlying foundation models, the better the models will perform. And not only will they perform better, they'll perform in a more safe way, and they'll perform in a less biased way. So we don't have to, rely on the word of some random landscaping company in Suitland to understand what Suitland is all about, right? We need diverse data sets to build the best possible foundation models. And obtaining those diverse data sets means you can't rely solely on public or open data. We need access to other data that may be subject to obligations that Microsoft has to honor, but because doing so will enable us to develop better, safer, fairer tools, it behooves us to honor those obligations. The second point is about the uptake of these tools. What we have found is that, organizations that can derive immense benefits from AI tools, benefits that help society more broadly, not just the organizations themselves, rightfully have concerns about how the data from their own organizations will be used as it's fed into the AI cycle. And what we've seen is that enterprise customers and public sector customers want assurances that their data will not be shared with third parties without their permission, that their data will not be used to train the underlying foundation models without their permission, that prompts and responses will be kept private, and that any data used for fine-tuning a specific AI tool will be used just for that tool. And at Microsoft, we have a long-standing, commitment to upholding privacy rights, and that extends to the AI context as well. And again, what that means is that we're building trust and facilitating more users to actually take advantage of what AI has to offer. And in that way, we're expediting and facilitating these broader societally beneficial outcomes. So from that lens, we think that while the value of open data remains something that, should be a guiding principle, we should also consider other perspectives that ultimately help us get the best outcomes from data.
Thank you. I would love to argue that with you for the rest of the day as an open data advocate. But I hear you. I hear that you're really putting the focus on value and creating value, and you see open data as a vehicle to take you there. So it might be different ways of doing that. And by the way, what we advocate is that too, is open data by default. In other words, not everything is open data. It's really to see what is it, the value that we can get from open data. But we're still going to push you for more open data, Annie.
Well, and I will just say, Shaida, we take the position that insofar as we can make data available, we look for new ways to do that. So completely aligned on that.
Thank you. François, coming to you, bringing all this back home, and Paris 21 works in 90 countries, and of course you prioritize a lot the disadvantaged statistical systems in least developing countries, low-income, fragile, and small island developing nations. So what challenges do you see for the Global South when it comes to implementation of the AI technologies and ensuring trusted quality official statistics?
Thanks, Shaida. Very easy question, as always. And in 3 minutes. So I think for us in Paris 21, with our mission to improve the production and use of good data for good policies in the Global South, what we call quality data is actually nothing new in the AI age. It's data which we can find easily. It's data which we can understand easily. It's data which can be used and repurposed easily. This, however, can mean different things in the AI age. We heard that AI needs good data to be good. And that means data which is unbiased. Should it be gender? Should it be geographies? We heard the keynotes on this. We also see that AI can help us produce good data. We heard a few examples. We'll hear from the IMF and their StatGPT in the afternoon. We observe in Paris 21 many innovations in terms of using AI to document, to put metadata along with data so that machines and users can actually make sense and reuse and repurpose data, because data is expensive and has to be repurposed and reused. We also see very cool stuff on AI, explaining charts and data viz. We know the power of good data viz and the power of data, and we see this as a very promising development. In Paris 21, we also believe that the NSOs, who are not alone in this game, are an essential part. They are sitting and they are making accessible a wealth of very policy-relevant data, which is inclusive of different communities in their countries. And we particularly work on helping NSOs document and publish data so that some of the shortcomings in terms of data availability from the Global South are actually met. Again, nothing new, but AI can be an accelerator of publishing understandable data. We observe that many NSOs actually are topping this game. We heard from the US, from Rwanda. There are many others NSOs in this world which are not only using AI, but also contributing to new LLMs or SLMs, and are getting their voices heard. So for us in Paris 21, it's very important. So quality is important. Quantity from the global south, again, is key. We know there are large data gaps. Gender data, climate change data, local data, all those things are hampering AI. And in turn, we can be hopeful that AI can help generate some meaningful data there. From Paris 21, you won't be surprised that we call for more resources in the system. Good AI needs good data, which needs good people. And good people don't come from heaven. You need to finance them. You need to attract them to these offices. In the OECD, we struggle to compete to attract talent on data science because they are more paid by Google or Microsoft. What happens in a country like Rwanda, you can imagine. So we need more profiling of those functions, data science, data engineers, which are absolutely needed, as those offices often come with systems, legacy systems from the past, which are not as fluid to be posted on Google Data Commons or others. So we come with a big responsibility to make our data more accessible, more usable, and we can be optimistic that AI can help. I think we are pragmatic in Paris 21. Gen AI is here. How to make it useful, how we can make it work both for those who produce data and those who use it, and also those who finance it. And there's a call for those who finance it to do more of cool stuff, and don't forget the good old household surveys and the census and opening admin data files, which are all necessary data silos which can be opened with AI solutions. So, optimistic and pragmatic, and I think these are two important words for us.
Thanks, François. I have a follow-up question similar to what I had for Yusuf. Paris 21 does an amazing job on leadership training and building skills among leaders of national statistical offices. Do you think those leadership trainings could become a good vehicle for also making the leadership of national statistical offices more AI implementation savvy?
Yes, absolutely. We've seen an enormous interest from several chief statisticians who come to these trainings, which we do in partnership with many in the room here, to look into innovation management, to get the skills and infrastructure to attract new talent. That's something which we need more emphasis on, more resource to do, and which is very impactful. I think Yusuf can add to this, because some of himself benefited from some of these approaches and some of his staff as well. This goes hand in hand with the role of NSOs in data stewardship, in playing a coordination role in the national statistical systems at large, and engaging with the private sector and with others.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, this is your chance now. Please, we have a microphone in the middle of the room. You have to actually come there and introduce yourself. And if you have a specific question for any of our panelists, or whether you have a general question for all of us, let us know. Please go ahead, and then you can be the next. Anybody else? And then Joel, you're the third one. Please go ahead.
Great. Thanks to all the panelists and also the moderator for the insights being shared. It's true that...
Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Peter Adu, the head of emerging technology at the French Development Agency, which is Agence Française de Développement. So back to what I was saying, we do agree that much of the data is held by the private sector, right? And it is important to foster collaborations, right? Which we refer to it as data collaboratives, right? So I think it is important to do that. But I have one comment or remark that I want to share. I think it is important that we increase investments in data stewardship functions, both in private and also in public sector. This is very, very important because, I mean, if we do not have these functions, even in the private sector, how do we ensure that the right governance structure in terms of data and also the quality is being done? How do we have templates for data sharing, right? And principles or agreements around that. So I think it's important that we increase investments in these areas, data stewardship functions in both private and also in the public sector. There is also another part, I think it's for Annie, if I'm not mistaken. Microsoft has been doing pretty well in sharing some data. We recently released a report, this month, I think 2 weeks ago, which is on responsible sharing of reuse of data, right? Using a social license approach, right, with public engagement. So to boost trust, aside having agreements, I think it's important we have a new form of, licensing on data reuse, right? Because the consentment that we usually have today is mainly individual based, right? Can we have a community approach, right, to consentment, right? Can we use social license like what we have in the mining industry on the full cycle of the data, right? When we're talking about data reuse. So there's something we've been thinking about. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Shall we collect a couple of more questions and then come back to the panel? Would you like to move there, or we can give you also a hand mic if. Oh, he's going.
Thank you, Shaida. My name is Ben Hu, and I retired from the World Bank and started a nonprofit organization called DEMA International, and formed a chapter in China, Hong Kong. And I have a very quick comment for Oliver. For example, first, we focus so much on metadata. Actually, metadata is data under different contexts. The second comment is machine readable. Machine readable is very different than human readable. So there's a lot of confusion about that. A lot of very tough data issues until we bring the human dimension together with how the data was created and understood. It's getting more and more difficult. And also I would like to hear that you mentioned that landscape data is not good from Commerce Department perspective. In your speech, you mentioned that. You say you're surprised at how the bad data was published, or something like that, by a landscape company. Actually, I would like to see how we frame the discussion about the data, actually. Bring the human dimension into the discussion. For example, I would like to hear the landscape company who produce data, how they produce it. May not be the same way you understand what the landscape data should be. And all kinds of those issues, a lot of things are human behind the data are not being well discussed, right? So I think like IMF managing director one time, every year they have a statistical annual conference. Year after year, still talk about how do we measure the data. So we have to frame the discussion in a different way so we can really have some tangible progress made.
Thank you.
For Microsoft, And I think I believe that when the tour, Bill Gates and Melinda went to look at the data in development or whatever. And it was Melinda raised the issue, the data is biased, right? Why Bill didn't see the bias and Melinda felt it's biased. So this is a very typical thing happening in the data discussion. So in the end, I just wish we have a better, deeper discussion, human and data. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we're just starting this conversation, so stay tuned. Yes, please, Joel, if you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Shaida. I'm Joel Gurin. I'm the president of Center for Open Data Enterprise, or CODE. We're a nonprofit here in Washington whose mission is to maximize the value of open and shared data for the public good. And we've done this for 10 years in collaboration with the White House, a number of federal agencies, the World Bank, and other international organizations. So I have a question, I think, Oliver, initially for you, but then for the whole panel. I love this idea of moving from machine readable to machine understandable, and it strikes me that that's a profound change. So I have really two questions. I think the first question, Oliver, maybe that you could start, is what do you see as some of the initial steps on that journey? Because I think it will be a journey. And then for everyone, wondering what opportunities there may be for collaboration between government agencies and ministries, the private sector, NGOs, and others to achieve that goal, rather than seeing it as something that is only the responsibility of data stewards within government. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Joel. There's one more question. Please come to the microphone.
On my toes. So firstly, I want to give props to all the speakers.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah. I'm Shubhangi. I am a research analyst from the Urban Institute. I work on a lot of projects related to community engagement with data and quantitative projects, and having community input in deciding the policy for AI for both federal and state governments and local organizations here in DC. So I want to give props to some of the points that the speakers brought up today. Annie, you brought up that, sometimes the expertise on how that data should be dealt with lies in the very community that was collected with, and we have to respect that as well. And the point that François brought up, that it takes good people, and they don't come from heaven. They have to be supported, and there has to be a lot towards the capacity building of leadership. So all of this got me thinking that while open data does make knowledge technically open to all, we all know that the inequities that are in the world often do show up in the human decisions behind the data, as well as in the way we're dealing with AI, and specifically with the economic benefits of research and the collaborative structures of research that often end up excluding marginalized communities. So my question for any of the panelists is if they have any examples of truly centering equity and bidirectional learning. So it's not just one way that we're holding the data and we get to decide when, how to make it accessible. And in a way that really combines the potential of open data to address these issues of inequity in economic benefits of research and collaborative structures. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. Should we take one more, or do we have too many? Jessa, let's take you, and then we'll stop for responses. And I think that would be it, because we have 10 more minutes, and we want to give enough time for the responses. Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Shaida, and thank you, everyone, for the...
We all know you, but can you introduce yourself?
Yes. Jess Encarnacion from UN Women, Interregional Advisor on Gender Statistics. So just particularly probably this question is for Yusuf and François, because I think in your interventions, you have mentioned about the timeliness of this efforts with regards to your, for example, NSBS preparation, and likewise the work that is being done by Paris 21 for at least 90 90 countries. Now, tying this up with the presentation from Gil earlier, that that the AI, for example, is the fourth GPT, and that the others it took years, etc. But I think the way that was being said, for example, in the intervention, is that AI is being incorporated on a phased approach, if I may say, for some of the sectors in the work that is being done by Rwanda, for example. I think just looking at the example given by Gil, it seems that AI is somehow frontier, somehow not part of foundational. So it's more of, when I see patterns, for example, for steam power, for electricity, for internet, it's all necessity as a way of life. For right now, as far as the work that we do on data and use of AI, it is still not foundational. It is still good practice, but not an absolute necessity or a prerequisite in the way we do our work. So I think seeing that when Gil mentioned that we still have 5 years left, so my question to Yusuf and to François is really, how do we now progress in terms of this being part of this being a requirement rather than just like, a phased approach, or it's something that is beyond foundational?
Thank you. Thanks, Jess. So those two questions for François and Yusuf. But the other questions, I think I come back to the panel for that. But I hear there's a spirit, common spirit among a lot of the questions of how can we improve data stewardship, how can we make data much more reusable and more inclusive, and put really people much more, as Ben was saying, at the center of data rather than sort of at the end of the data value chain. So. Ani, you want to start from you if you want to respond to any of the question or overall to the spirit of what you've heard.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I'll pick up on this theme that data needs to be sort of more human focused and human centered. And I would just heartily agree with that sentiment, and actually even expand it to say the way that we approach AI in general needs to bear in mind the reality that AI is not a human, AI should not be anthropomorphized, and humans need to remain at the center of all decision making, both when it comes to building AI tools, building AI data sets, and also in how it's used and how decisions are applied. One thing that we have done at Microsoft to try and address some of these concerns, especially about bias, is we've actually launched an AI Fellows program where we're seeking input from AI scholars across the globe from countries that may not always have the biggest voice in the room when it comes to AI development, specifically so that we can center those voices and hear from them around what they think needs to be done to reduce bias and to sort of build AI in a way that leads to more equitable outcomes. So we have sort of just launched that project. We finished that first phase. And, I think that this is a theme that is very much front of mind for us. To take it back to principles, inclusiveness, fairness are two of our core responsible AI principles at Microsoft. We bear these in mind with sort of every action that we take on the AI front. So I can't recall specifically who the speaker was, but someone proposed this idea of, I think it might have been the gentleman from the French Development Agency, thinking about new ways to share data, to come up with new sort of license approaches. I think this is exactly what we need to be doing. We're confronting situations that we haven't yet had to confront, where there's tough problems about data access, the quality of data, the biases that may be inherent in that data. And I think it really is incumbent on private companies to work in partnership with non-governmental organizations, with governments, to come up with novel solutions. And, like Microsoft is a company that has been leaning into doing precisely that, and there's certainly more room for it. So I think that this is a dialogue that's well worth continuing.
Thanks, Fanny. Oliver, coming to you, there are a number of questions for you, but again, you can do specific or kind of aggregate them into a sort of a response from you and the spirit of what you heard.
Yes. Thanks. So I'll start with Joel's question and maybe wind through some of the others. So, and Joel's question was, how do we make that move from that? How do we make that paradigm shift from machine readability to machine understandability? And I don't know this for sure. So this is why we're entering into this exploratory and listening phase with the launch of an RFI. But here's what I think so far. One, you need standard ontologies, right? And many of those ontologies already exist, whether it's NEAM or schema.org or some of the existing standards that are promulgated by international bodies like this one. Then you need to have some knowledge graph so that it's well understood the relationships between those ontologies. Third, then the AI has to be exposed to those knowledge graphs, and those ontologies have to be exposed to those AI, either at the training phase or at the tuning phase, or maybe some other phase. And then fourth, when we publish those data need to be published with those standard ontologies, right? And then kind of the fifth part is those data shouldn't be in nested tables that are actually kind of like a PDF but an HTML version. And that's what we ran into to get to the landscaping company part. That's what we ran into initially, is that the census data isn't really readily crawlable by the standard crawlers that make up the data corpuses for the big large language models. So I think those are the fifth things. The fourth part, but like steps 1 through 4, they are really about about good data stewardship, good data management practices. And I want to foot stomp the comment made, I think it was in the first concept about the importance of data stewardship. And as governments and philanthropy is looking to invest in AI skilling, I would say for sure, good data stewardship is paramount to AI skilling. And frankly, we should be careful not to invest in things like I had to take typing class when I was in 7th grade, because people before thought that was a skill that everyone would need, and they didn't know how to type. But if you're a kid growing up, of course you're going to learn how to type. Right. So there are some AI skills that probably will be spittingly obvious if you're a young person growing up and will go to university where using Gen AI will just be standard procedure, that actually we don't need to invest in, because everyone who doesn't know how to do that will just retire eventually. And what we do need to invest in is very good data stewardship so that we can expose data in the right way, that we can maximize the potential of realizing the upside of these technologies and minimizing the downside risk.
Thanks. And those of you, I know there are a lot of questions in the room for Oliver. You can catch him during lunch as well. So Yusuf and François, you have the last word on responding to the questions, particularly from Jessa. And I think what she was asking is more guidance on the means of implementation and how do we get there?
Yeah, I want to respond on 2 issues. The first one, of course, is whether it's smart to invest in AI, especially in countries like developing countries, low-resource countries, given other fundamental issues that also need to be fixed. What I would say is, in the past, we did a mistake. We shouldn't do that similar mistake now and going forward. In the past, we thought that we should invest in statistics, especially development institutions, even like the World Bank. We should only invest in statistics after investing in every other thing, roads, schools, hospitals, then come for statistics later, after you have some leftover monies to invest in statistics. That was a big mistake. Now we know that the less resources you have, In fact, the more you should invest in statistics, because the less resources that you have would allow investing in other sectors properly and more efficiently. Now, with AI, the same applies. If you think you need to invest in good specialist doctors, for example, to do good diagnostics and interpretations, the more you need to invest in AI to actually help people in the health sector to quickly leapfrog and do more and better diagnostics in health. So I think it can't come after. It should be either at par or even come at the beginning. Another important issue that was discussed today is about collaborations, especially collaborations for access to data. This is something that is very important. As we said, most data is not produced anymore in statistics offices in public sector. And the way we are trying to approach it, for example, in our country, is to understand the interests of all these players who have data and balance that with public interest. We can't only look at one side. For example, the private sector, of course, they have commercial interests. They have many other interests, and those have to be safeguarded as well, but also factor in a public interest. So we think this is a very important debate that has to go forward to make sure that we make progress in data access, big data, and artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Thanks, Yusuf. So, François, you have the last word.
Thanks. On Jessa's point on whether AI is a must or a nice to have, we were part of a conversation in the OECD 2 weeks ago between the OECD and the African Union Commission, and it came several times from the delegations from African countries which were Ministry of Digital, that AI was a nice to have. They were busy rolling out infrastructure to connect some regions in the countries, some sectors. They were prioritizing health against education. I mean, this was the infrastructure. The nice things which we discuss here were not, number one on the radar, and I think that's fair to say. When you speak with chief statisticians, I think that's a different perspective altogether. They see the benefits, the risks for them not to move quick, and I think there's quite a big sense of urgency to move fast and together on this question. How much we reconcile this with the time frame of Intermit, I think that's a question for Haishan, not for me. I mean, I would take it very positively. It's great to have ambition, and therefore, what are the resources we need to make it happen? I think the conversation is just starting. Many of our agencies don't have a common policy on the topics. And it's our first conversation on this topic here. So if we need to be finished before we start, then we need to really get serious with the investment, with how we connect different countries, different communities together. Again, last week there was a very interesting conversation between some of the lead agencies and experts on this, how we can leapfrog initiatives from one organization to the other, how we can pool resources. And these are things which statisticians and many in the community know how to manage. So I think a big push for more investment, more country ownership, and it's about raising again the profile for good data, for good analytics, and showing the impact on development. So not stuff which is new, stuff which is probably given a new flavor, a new urgency thanks to AI.
Thanks, François. So we've come to the end of this amazing discussion. I know we need at least a couple of more days to talk about quality. It's really complex to get deep into this. We heard from our panelists from government offices, from, of course, NGOs, and from private sector. One thing I walk away with is this message that AI and quality data have a symbiotic relationship, that we need We need quality data for power of AI, but also, of course, AI can do amazing work for improving the quality of data. So that's one thing which is really hopeful and an action item for us to move ahead. But also there is lots of hints and really good practices, and also areas that we need to learn more. I think Oliver was very humble in terms of saying what we need to learn more and do more research on. So the means of implementation is going to be very important for us to keep in mind, and also focusing that this is an agenda we want to move on all sectors, on all countries. So we're not going to be creating even greater inequalities. We're in a great place with Paris 21, hosted by World Bank and IMF. These are the organizations that can really take this agenda forward, both in terms of bringing us together, but also operationalizing some of these action items into the work and improving the statistical and data systems around the world. So, join me to thank this amazing group and send them off with a big applaud and vote for life.